This is the Beyond the Dojo podcast. I'm Lauren.
I'm Jeremiah.
I feel like all of these years of stepping in front stance and like front kicking and placing your feet down without stomping has all led up to this one moment in our lives. To be able to put the baby down to sleep and then sneak out of the room without stomping. This is the second time we've tried to film this podcast today. So
In the past 10 minutes. Let's be real.
Yes. So today we wanted to base this episode on a really interesting comment on one of our previous episodes. So our episode where we interviewed Rick Houghton, the handle of this person is type deaf. He says, or she, my current dojo and sensei doesn't give me any wiggle room on technique for being 6'5". He says my legs are too wide, etc. I have told him many times that if I did it the way he wants, I feel unnatural and weak. If you look at a 20-inch BMX bike and a 24-inch BMX bike, just 4 inches difference, and the geometry is drastically different because you don't just grow or shrink the bike or else it isn't nimble or fast anymore. I wish he was more open to at least testing what feels right to me and not being so rigid with what he thinks right looks like. So what are some initial thoughts on that, Jeremiah?
Well, the teacher in me says, son, until you have enough time under your belt and you've honestly tried to give it a chance, just shut up and train, in a sense. And I mean that with all respect. I understand the complaint. I was a big American kid in a Japanese dojo, and they made me make the forms that would fit a Japanese child. And I was 3 times the size of one, so I understand the need to want to feel comfortable in your karate, but I also understand the benefit of building strength and ability and balance in your stances. Your sensei might be doing it in a harsh way, but if you want him to be open to what you have to say, I would think that you need to give him the same respect and be open to what he has to say and do what he does for a while. Now, if it starts to cause you pain, like, hey, my hips are killing me, there's a sharp pain there, then that's one thing.
Yeah.
But to kind of say, oh, I'm just broad, I'm big, I'm a big dude too.
Right.
You know?
What kind of stuff in Japan, like, were there any specific positions or shapes they were trying to make you get into that you felt were just not natural for you?
Well, majority of the stances felt too narrow.
Okay.
Majority of the hand positions felt too close to the body. Like I felt crowded. I like my hands to be further off. Although now I've come back to that hand position.
Right.
Like I appreciate the downward, the hand position of techniques. I appreciate the more traditional approach to it than compared to like, a little bit more free form in a sense. Makes the crowd. It's aesthetically pleasing.
What is?
The blocks, the shapes you make when you do very kihon karate, and it's appealing to me.
Okay.
At first it was all about, well, I just want to be faster, make blocks, make it work. So form didn't mean anything to me. But then, the more I wanted to make it work, the more the form kind of reinforced principles that I had to have. So I, in a long about way, understood many years down the road why a particular form is important. Yeah.
I mean, we're going to always err on the side of caution when it comes to other senseis.
Yeah.
Because, and this is not any offense to this person,
No.
but we have no idea what his instructor is teaching. He could be an excellent instructor. He could be a dipshit. I mean, we don't really know. So, our first response as instructors is going to be, okay, well, maybe there's a communication breakdown. Maybe he's trying to get you to do something that is natural for you, but, whatever. And, but we'll get into the nitty gritty of that in a minute, but we're always going to probably side with the sensei at first and be like, okay, well,
I don't want to
there
be
is a little bit of that
to anybody.
Right.
Everybody has a right to be concerned when it doesn't feel natural.
Right.
But I agree completely. I'm going to err on the side of the teacher because, first of all, you went to him or her and asked them to teach you. So you kind of got to submit to them. Right.
Yeah. So let's talk about maybe the purpose of that like confinement or that shape to start with, because there's this kind of this idea that's, I'm not sure how long it's been floating around in the Shotokan world at least, or in the karate world in general, but there's definitely this push by a lot of senseis to kind of break that shape. And it, obviously the interview was with Rick Houghton, and I feel like there is a point where he is kind of a proponent of that as well, of like breaking that shape. So let's kind of talk about what's the purpose initially of having a specific structure, or I think, what was the term he used?
Form.
Well, yeah, he was just saying not having any wiggle room on technique. Doesn't feel right to me. That feels so rigid. So I think he's maybe focused a little bit more on the look of things. So let's talk about maybe the look of things. Why it doesn't matter what our karate actually looks like.
Well, I would say from a teacher's standpoint, again, it's easier to teach a shape at first than it is to teach a principle. Mm-hmm. If you're a good teacher, as they progress, you talk more about the principle of the technique and less about the shape. Mm-hmm. But I feel like form is a great way to teach good technique. Mm-hmm. It's an easy way to nitpick everything and to get it to a standard.
So my mind is so like sometimes compartmentalized or like geometric when it comes to learning karate. So if I can conceptualize the beginning of the technique, the end shape of the technique, and then the path to get there, and then, use that in whatever way needs to be applied from that point. But just in learning the technique, if I can get the beginning, the middle, and the end, then for me, that makes it easier to fathom like what it is I'm doing. And then it can start to turn into more of a principle. But that's kind of how I've learned, is like there's an initial shape, there's an ending shape, and there's a path to get there. What does that shape look like? Mm-hmm. And I think we teach beginners that way also. We're showing all of the technique. We're showing the beginning, middle, and end. We're showing the entire path, but maybe at first they're only seeing the ending of the movement. Right. You teach 4 and 5-year-olds, and you do rising block. Well, they just put their hand up like this over their head, and it may or may not look like it's supposed to, and they may be like swinging their arms out to the sides, but they're kind of making the shape that you're looking for. So there's that. I feel like this becomes a really prevalent conversation though, especially when it comes to stances.
Yeah.
So stances can be really tricky, just because of variations in hip structure, in knee structure, and tendon thickness, and ankle structure. So did you experience any of that with training in Japan? Did you experience any discomfort in your stances as far as what
ankle,
they were?
Ankle, what, flexibility or dexterity?
It would be like flexibility. Yeah.
Flexibility, right? Ankle flexibility was not the greatest for me. Mm-hmm. So in the dojo I went to, the every stance, the bent knee, when you look down from your stance, you cannot see your toes. Mm-hmm. You had to bend so far that your toes were covered. Mm-hmm. And for an awkward, rather large American, that's kind of hard. Mm-hmm. But do I have better stances from it? Yes, I do.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's one of those things. I feel like it's like when you get in trouble with your parents as a kid. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm gonna never make my kid do that. And, oh, it's so stupid. And then you get to an adult and you have a kid, and you do the exact same thing your parents did, but now you know why they did it, and you're like, that's a genius move.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of what I feel like this is.
Right.
It's like you have to give it time. You have to let it prove itself to you in a sense, and then you have to trust in the process. So the form for me was Iron Preston. So like in Japan,
I was like, who is Iron Preston?
No, like
sorry.
Please.
Go ahead.
They're very strict about form, and all we did was train against Sarah. Mm-hmm. And the dojo I was at, about 2 basketball courts long, and it was from one end of the dojo to the other. Mm-hmm. It was no 10 reps and move on to something else. It was 20 reps or more.
Right.
So it was constantly working on those things.
Yeah.
And then the time I grew up in karate, the shinai was like the teaching tool. So, they'd smack you with the shinai. It was you learned pretty quick what you had to do.
Yeah.
So
with stances in particular, like we've gotten in, we could say arguments, but we tell a student, hey, bend your front knee. They're like, I am bending my knee. And we're like, if we're telling you to bend your knee, it ain't bent enough. Yeah. But kids will start off way up high in stance and not even bending their knees. You got to remember what the point of Kihon is and what the point of these shapes is. The point is to develop aspects of athleticism. So you are trying to gain mobility in all of the joints. You are trying to also be able to move out of those joints, out of those angles and out of those positions fairly easily, if possible. You're using Kihon to hone your ability, your movement, and your athleticism. It's slightly exaggerated, and then whenever you're sparring or you're applying it, it's obviously not quite that extreme. There is obviously a point where it's a bit much, though. There's a point where the stances and the positions are over exaggerated, and this is one of those where we always emphasize, like, teachers, instructors who are coaching anything that has to do with the human body, especially with karate. You should have at least a small amount of knowledge of biomechanics or of human anatomy at a minimum. Even if you don't understand biomechanics, just understanding, like, the hip joint only goes out so far, and there's tons of variation from person to person, and, you know, ethnicity to ethnicity. So even, like, that's one of the things that's talked about the Japanese, is that I guess they have maybe, like, thicker patellar tendons, I believe is what it is. Yeah. So they can get down into lower stances than, you know, Caucasians or whatever, because it doesn't bother their knees. They just have more support in that position. Whereas if we do that, you're in for a lot of trouble, because all of the structures of the knee are getting a lot more compressed. Now, that's not to say that you can never, you know, put your knees over your toes and stuff. Like, there's not a lot of necessarily danger in doing that a little bit. And there's lots of research to show that getting into, like, really compressed positions with the knees and things like that, as long as it's trained over time and it's something that your body can physically handle because of anatomy reasons, which you wouldn't know that, I guess, until you tried. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But thinking about it from a beginner's perspective, more than likely you're getting someone who's not super athletic. So, you know, we're kind of like towing this line of, like, we want students to have a certain shape because they're training a certain principle, and yet we don't want to push them so far that they get injured, they get an overuse injury, or they tear something because they moved improperly, right, etc. So it is a little bit complicated, and that's one of the reasons why you can't always give, like, a straight response to things like that.
Right. And I would encourage students to be honest with themselves. Mm-hmm. Is it uncomfortable because it's painful, or right, is it uncomfortable because you're weak in that position?
Right.
You know, be honest with yourself. If it's because you feel weak, mm-hmm, then you know you're safely going to be able to build those muscles, right? Mm-hmm. I think karate is a good way to build range of motion in joints, mm-hmm, because the way we train it's over time, right? We don't expect a white belt to have a perfect front stance. Mm-hmm. We just want the front knee bend.
Right.
Right. And as they progress, we ask for more and more.
Right.
It's a really safe way to build the range of motion and flexibility in your joints. But you got to trust the process. Right. Why I just feel. Excuse me.
Achoo.
Sorry.
He's battling a cold.
Excuse me. I've been dealing with head cold for a while. Shit, I lost my thought.
well, what I was thinking, I mean,
sneezed it out.
I was thinking, you know, kind of taking a step beyond that, unless you're still talking about the same concept,
no
stances, and what I was thinking too is, like, okay, so that was kind of addressing students. Now, addressing senseis.
Sorry.
Yes. Bless you. You do have to be careful. Because whenever you're teaching students, oftentimes we just get so caught up in our own look and what we think karate is supposed to look like that we make little clones of ourselves. So that's where the danger lies. And that's usually where this conversation comes from, and why a lot of high-level sensei are trying to veer away from that. Because you have entire organizations of people who have, like, one sensei that they're all kind of following after, and they all look like that person. And they may have never even trained with that person, but they've trained with someone who is modeling their karate off of that person. Right. So you have this, like, entire lineage of people who have this look to them. I mean, perfect example, you can look at people who train with Nishiyama in different eras, right, and you can tell if they trained with him. Number one, you can tell if they trained with him. Number two, you can tell when they trained with him based on what their karate looks like, because he taught differently and looked different from one decade to another. So, you know, and that's not good either. So, students are going to often be looking at their instructors and they're going to be emulating what they're physically seeing, but only what they're seeing them do physically. But if the instructor is forcing the student to make the same shapes that they're making and their body style is different, there is some issue there. So we're not trying to completely dismiss what this person is saying. We're just kind of trying to make sure we cover all of our bases. As a teacher,
and the reason why we say this because everybody, like you said, has different range of motion, different abilities, athletically, right? And your teacher might be a really good karateka, but it's because his body's naturally flexible, or he's pretty limber in a sense. And if you're not that, then you're asking for trouble.
We had this guy named Tom one time who trained in the seniors class.
Oh, yeah.
And when I would work with him, when you're working on hip rotation early on with students, sometimes if they've never done anything anywhere remotely similar to karate, they don't have a lot of range of motion in their hips at all. So that always has to be taken into consideration. So we were working on like rotating to Hamni and then to Shomen, Hamni to Shomen. And when he would rotate to Hamni, side facing position with his hips, he was getting 30, 35 degrees of rotation, not 45. And he wasn't even coming close. I mean, like it was consistently like 30, 35 degrees. He was not getting that full rotation. Does it matter if he doesn't fully get 45 degrees? Well, it depends. I mean,
it matters less if he continues to get the same 35 degrees throughout his karate career compared if he continues to improve slightly.
So this is where it comes down to principle-based teaching. Why do we do hip rotation? Is it to make a 45-degree shape? Or is it to use it for power production? Is it to use it to improve the structure of that ending position? If it's for a purpose, then he just has less range of motion that he's working with. That's all. Right. And it's not going to be perfect. If he's doing like a rising block and he's not getting those hips completely, turned to the side or whatever, he might not have exactly the same structure behind it, but the idea is there and he's actually working in, to that final position with the hips and Hamni. And he's using the range of motion of the hips turning simultaneously with the block or with whatever technique that he's using. He's using it. It's just not as much range of motion as we would like to see. Dude was tall, slender, and I'm telling you, by looking at his stances, I just knew, based on how much he was able to move those hips, there was no way it was going to happen. He couldn't abduct his legs very far, so he couldn't bring the legs out to the side, and he didn't have a lot of internal-external rotation in the hips. He was just rigid. Yeah. It was just that kind of a guy. But I've had years of experience of doing this, so I was able to kind of see that kind of thing. And I also understand that there are some variations in hip anatomy. So that's just kind of an example from a teaching perspective how you can apply the idea without
excuse me
without forcing the student into a shape, because that would have ended up with an injury.
He'd have definitely got hurt.
Yeah,
and he was pretty rigid. He was really stiff. But changed it slightly. Let's talk about as Gidancha, as karateka that are still training. They're training for a long time. When is it appropriate to lose your form? Do you understand? By that I mean, like, at what point in your karate path is it a result of your training that your form has changed?
Your form is changed, or your form no longer exists? I mean...
Yeah, let's talk about what that exactly means, right?
So that's the confusing part, I think,
right.
for most people.
I think so, too. I agree. For me, when you free yourself of form, the underlying principles is the main driver of the technique, and no longer is the shape necessary. But by having the principles ingrained so hard, the form is somewhat like the essence of the form is there. You know what I'm saying? Like, you could have a front stance and be free of that form by shortening up or making a little bit longer or making a little bit wider.
Yeah.
Whatever the situation dictates.
But you can tell that it's a front stance.
You can tell it's a front stance.
Right.
But maybe it's a front stance as you're trying to shift laterally. You know what I'm saying? Or you're pivoting or something. And
I think something to add to that is, like, you don't have the same amount of rigidity at the end of the movement.
No, I agree.
Or at the end of the technique, excuse me. You don't have to end an oizuki in a front stance with the hips and shomen and the punch exactly just here, and the hikite exactly just there. I mean, you're using those ideas within the movement, but it may not look exactly like that. There are karateka who are masterful enough that they can apply those principles, and you can still look at their movement and you can tell what it is, and it's not a complete mess. I feel like sometimes people try to start applying things, or they try to start freeing up their movement, and it falls apart.
Yeah. Well, the saying is, learn the form, master the form, free yourself from form. Everybody learns the form, they forget the second part, and then they go straight to freeing the form. And,
like crazy noodle people.
Right. And I don't know. I mean, all right.
So what does it mean to master the form then?
Master the form is that you're able to think of the technique, and it's performed efficiently without you having to control it.
What does it mean by to say that it's performed efficiently?
Greatest bang for your buck. Greatest impact for the amount of effort you put into it. So that's using the correct muscle groups, that's using being correct in your structural alignment, and especially your coordination.
I would say that, yeah, especially like the understanding how the muscles are to fire to make it happen, and they're not being excess. So, I mean, we can say that, and that will just go shoot right over some people's heads. And I know that sometimes it goes over ours, but like efficiency is not just like how quick can I deliver this and move on to something else, or it's not just effectiveness, like how much did I hurt that person and then move on to something else. Granted, those things are valuable, but if we're looking at effectiveness and efficiency all wrapped up into one.
Yeah, it's balanced, right?
Yeah, we're trying to get rid of anything that is unnecessary. And I think we don't spend enough time, when you look at form, that is once again the point of Kihon, is it is a controlled movement. It is a controlled drill to get rid of anything that's not supposed to be there. If it's only this shape, then you don't have space for anything else to be there.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way to describe mastering the form. Is getting rid of anything that's unnecessary. Right? I think that's the best definition for that.
And
because it's so obvious that, it's quantifiable. You can video yourself, and you can say, okay, I'm not going to stand up halfway in my stance. And you can watch it, and boom, it's gone. And then you pick something else, right? I think that is the stage most people get to. And they do it for 10 years, maybe 15 years, and they think they got it.
Did they get to the efficiency stage, like trying to be more efficient?
Yeah, like they feel like 10, 15 years into it's a mastery.
Yeah.
Right? Like and then they want to move on to something else.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's mentally very grueling. I mean, because one of the best quotes I've ever heard is from Steve, and he says, if it feels strong, it probably isn't.
Yeah.
And sometimes people are so blinded by their feelings about their movement that they don't see themselves clearly.
Right.
I mean, I do the same thing. Like, I think I'm moving great, and then I video myself, and my knee is falling in, and I'm kicking my leg out to the side like a schoolgirl. I look like a freaking idiot. I mean, and it's very telling, but it's valuable to video yourself.
I'm guilty of that this morning. So I was
kicking like a schoolgirl.
That and going, oh, I got it. Right?
Right.
Feel good. So I had the ankle weights on, and I was just doing, I was working Nijisho and side thrust out of horse stance. So I was just doing 10 reps on each leg. And I was like, oh, that feels pretty good. So I did a side snap to have both variations, right? But the second side snap felt really good. I was like, all right, I'm going to put some zing to it.
Yeah.
Threw some zing into it, and my supporting leg, my groin, I could just feel it go. I could feel it. It didn't pop. I could just feel it like stretch within the joint. And I was like, you dumb idiot. Right? Because I based my progress on how it felt, not what I was doing.
Right.
And it's such an easy trap because you go, man, that felt really good. I could put some more into it.
Right.
I could do this better, right? And
yeah.
I feel like that's the exact opposite of what you want to do when you're trying to at the mastering the form level. It's not this it feels great, it is great.
Yeah.
You know, everything is well coordinated and it's smooth. When you look at it, you go, that's a technique, right?
And this is where it goes back to having an additional pair of eyes on your karate really helps. I mean, having your own and watching video, obviously, that's huge. If you can have another person, that's advantageous as well, though.
Right. It's the hardest thing for someone else to watch. It's the hardest thing for yourself to watch, right?
Right.
But I would say this: have the person whoever's watching the video be willing to listen to what they have to say.
Right.
Because they're looking at your karate from a completely different aspect than you are yourself.
I'm just scratching my face. I'm scratching my beard.
Listen, I just sneezed like 3 times, and I'm afraid I got like snot everywhere, boogers everywhere. So when you did that, I was like, oh. Anyways, what I'm saying is, the mastery level of your form changes you mentally more than any other level for me. Mm-hmm. Like, doing this for the last couple of years and just trying to get my form better, it's like, well, it's a grind. It's an emotional grind, right? It's you're not going to see improvement.
Right.
You're never going to see improvement unless you stop and look for it.
Right.
And I think that's the hardest thing.
So just kind of veering us back just a little bit, especially with what you just said about the borderline injury thing.
Yeah. So
when we talked about this podcast, what we discussed it as was confining yourself to the shape. The reason those confines are there is, once again, to teach you principles within that range, and that range only, to start with, and also to prevent injury from overextending yourself outside of that range. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why certain techniques, like when you practice them in Kihon, there's only a certain range that you really, I mean, I'm just throwing this out there. My opinion, there's only a certain range that you should practice them in whenever you're just learning the basics. This is my opinion also. My Yeti, front kick. I don't think, for basics, that you should practice long range front kicks. No. I don't think you should.
I don't think anything long range should be done at a basic level.
No, I don't think so either. In the dojo I grew up in, it was they were coming off of this like sparring era, and everything was long range. But you don't learn control in that. I mean, you might have a little bit of impact at the end of the long reach of that front kick, maybe, but then also you usually displaced your center of gravity so much that if you smack into anything, you're going to fall on your ass. So, you know, and Steve pointed that out multiple times, and that's the only reason that I know that now. So rather than practicing that crazy stretched out shape, practicing a shorter range, practicing a shorter range gives you just more control within that range. And granted, Kihon is, once again, it is exaggerated, but it's exaggerated just enough for you to practice all of those principles, and then you can change
within your form. You don't change your form or technique, right? So, like, the form is exaggerated within the idea of the stance, right? When you start talking about long range things, you change not only the form at the end, you're changing the middle path completely.
Yes, you end up changing a lot of the main principles that are being shown. I mean, sort of. I mean, you could probably make it work if you have the principles down, but most people don't, and they're just slinging their leg out there and sliding across the floor.
At a beginner's level, it's horrible.
Yep.
As you increase control and balance, it's a idea you should work on, but it's not something you should be doing in your Q ranks. I think it's something you do in your Dan ranks.
Right.
So
taking that then, the last step of freeing yourself from the form, if we're doing that, at what level of Dan rank, at what point, in your opinion, are we starting to free ourselves from this extreme emphasis on form?
So I've been stuck on this idea of like in your stance and on your stance, and it's been like just predominantly on my thoughts in karate. And we were down at Rick's place for Father's Day's training. Okay. Right? Or Father's Day, we spent it down in Sarasota, but we trained on Sunday there with him. Yep. And I asked him that question. I said, you know, what is it what is in your stance and on your stance? And he says, well, it was taught to me that it's the undersides of your body, super heavy. And he goes, but it's always heavy. You don't step into your stance and then drop into a lower stance.
Yeah.
You're always at that level where it's heavy and you have this relaxation. So when you step into a stance, there's no stop and then sink. There's all at that one point. But there's an obvious relaxed form.
Right.
I think that's the ultimate, like, master the form part, where you're able to move and do keyhole stuff, but it slightly doesn't look as staunch. There's not a lot of like mechanical looking moves. It's very fluid, and your center of gravity is always is controlled throughout all the movements. Like, it's low, and it's that's your main source of power. I think that's where the form starts to lose
the emphasis there.
The impact.
So Steve told me something kind of similar, and I don't want to misquote him, but I believe he said when he was in Japan training that he used to train on a lot of his stuff that he did in the dojo during the day. He used to train late at night. And I don't know if it was at night or if it was just after a class, but he was working on Fudodachi, and one of the instructors there came up to him, and I believe he had an interaction with them, but he said that he was so exhausted that he just kind of just relaxed into the stance, just softened down. And when he explained that to me about Fudodachi, I was like, wait, that makes a lot of sense, because I feel like we spend a lot of time actually pushing up out of the shape, like pushing up,
working against your shape.
Yeah, working against gravity, and thinking of the stance as like a form of resistance, as opposed to relaxing into that stance. And maybe that's kind of this like one little step above getting out of the form, is like we're no longer like forcing ourselves into these shapes. We have those motor patterns nailed down to such a point that now we're actually relaxing into those shapes. So not just the stances, but also the arm movements and all that kind of stuff. It's a little bit more
that's
relaxed.
Funny. To confirm that, I was talking to Steve and asked the question too, and said, Steve, this sounds like something, it's just you have to do so much until your body relaxes into it. He's like, yeah. It is a repetition thing. He says, you got to repeat it. You have to do good reps. It's got to be correct reps. But eventually your body will get so used to it that it does not tense up.
Yeah.
It's not holding you up no more.
Yeah.
You're just in stance.
Yeah. And I think
that's, to me, is just like, yeah.
If you want to talk about efficiency also, if you're moving from one point to another, if you have excess tension, something is going to be amiss, and that is not efficient. So if you are relaxed in that shape when you're not needing to produce any tension, then you are working toward efficiency. Yeah. Even the research shows that quick movements, especially like strikes and things like that, or throws or whatever, there's an initial pulse to start the movement, there's a relaxation phase, and then there's like a kime point at the end of the movement. And this is across all sports. There's usually something like that in order to propel the body, propel the limbs. So that would be the same thing here, as you're trying to relax in through the path of the movement, in that aspect, but then also relaxing down into the stances and things like that. So, But unless you have the shapes first, you can't relax into it. Otherwise, you're a pile of goo.
Right. Well, if you're misaligned, use the wrong coordination, there's a lot of things that go amiss to where, you'll literally step forward in stance, land in front stance, then bend your knees. I've seen people do that.
I was at a seminar one time where they said that you should no longer layer your step in and your punch so that the step in drives the punch. Instead, you should step and then you should punch afterwards. Remember that seminar we went to? Yeah. It was a very very famous organization that decided to tell people that. Anyway, let's stop with that. Any other thoughts on this one? Let me double check the quote here.
Well, I think. I hate to say this.
I have one other thought.
Okay.
The other thought was, I did kind of touch on this earlier, just about geometry, and about the shape of your body. Like, if you actually can't make a certain shape or do a certain technique because of an issue, like we've had people with shoulder replacements and stuff where they can't like lift their arm to a certain shape, so they're doing the best that they can. They can't like externally rotate the humerus or whatever. They can't rotate their arm properly in order to get like a knife hand block. They can't do a front kick properly because like the width of their hips or something like that.
Knee replacement, hip replacements.
I feel like those instances, to be honest,
excuse me,
they're actually pretty rare. Usually you end up with something that looks pretty similar to what the original form is. If it's so rigid that they can't make that shape, usually that's a problem with the way the teacher is teaching. That is kind of, somewhat validating what this guy is saying, but once again, we don't know. We don't know what his instructor is teaching.
Right. It depends on the situation and what the guy with the comment there is saying, or the girl. Mm-hmm. If we knew the teacher, we'd probably have a better idea what's going on.
Yeah.
I was going to say something, I missed it.
Phew.
Yeah, exactly. A fleeting thought.
Catch it.
Yeah. So, what I wanted to say was this, is in the end of all things, after talking about freeing yourself from form, make sure you have good enough form, good enough technique to where you're safe. You're not going to harm yourself doing karate.
Mm-hmm.
And strong enough to control your movement.
Yeah.
If you're going to try to break form, I mean, it's your karate. Do as you please. You might end up hurting yourself if you try too early.
Have you ever watched High School Musical?
No.
It was a really stupid movie.
That's probably why I didn't watch it.
Yeah, it was really dumb. But they have this great song. Soaring, we're breaking free. Soaring, flying. That's what popped in my head when we started
so what you trained on? What you working on?
What am I working on?
Yeah.
I am working on not being injured.
Gosh.
I mean, I get injuries sometimes, but who knew that being a mom was so dangerous? Because like, I keep injuring my left shoulder. Right-handed moms oftentimes will get like left side injuries from like holding the baby on the left side and like doing stuff with their right hand. And that happened a couple months ago. It got better, and then I got too big for my britches and did this ab exercise with a kettlebell that was too heavy and heard a nice little pop in there. So my left shoulder hurts. Also injured the ball of my foot, so I'm healing all of that. And we're at 5 months postpartum, which means the baby's eating more, which means that I'm trying to produce a lot of breast milk, and if I don't eat enough, I don't get enough calories, then it's hard to recover from injuries. So it's complicated being a female and trying to be an athlete. So eat your calories, ladies and gentlemen.
Listen, no one's judging.
Yes. I'm sure they're tired of hearing about pregnancy, though. Ew! What you working on?
Same stuff as last week. Kanku Dai. I did Shill this week a little bit more. Gankaku. And then just a lot of like... So, I'm a proponent that when you do ankle and wrist weight training, it should be lightweight. Like lightweight. I do 1.5 pounds on my ankles.
Lightweight, baby!
And 2 pounds on my wrists. That's it.
That was Ronnie Coleman.
And that's enough to where I can... Huh? What'd you say?
I said it was Ronnie Coleman. It was a Ronnie Coleman quote.
Oh.
Lightweight, baby!
Oh, yeah. I was like, what?
Look up 4 hours of Ronnie Coleman screaming. Just do it.
Ronnie Coleman's a famous bodybuilder.
Everyone should know who Ronnie Coleman... I have a picture of me and Ronnie Coleman, like, doing Most Muscular. Anyway.
Nice.
Yeah, go ahead.
But that's what I'm doing. I'm going through a kick. I don't believe... Well, certain people will train with that way all the time. But I think that's because they achieved a certain level of strength within their tendons and supportive muscle groups that it doesn't bother them. But for people that are trying to get into it, you have to take breaks away from it because it just wears on you. Like, it wears on your joints. It wears on your ligaments, like, bad. So, I'm doing that now. I'm on that kick. I'll probably do it for another couple weeks and then take a break from it. Do something different. But a little bit more weight training, a little bit more physical fitness perspective. Not as much on technique right now. Except for, like, getting in my stance. I'm still trying to do that. I am obsessed with that idea. So.
I was only half listening. I was thinking about Ronnie Coleman.
I know. That's why when I say so and you're like, oh yeah, I know you're not listening because
everybody wants to be a bodybuilder.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to lift this heavy ass weight. I'll do it though.
Alright. Awesome.
Okay, well.
Thank you.
Bye.